I noticed after I put up the last Epstein video that several people said, well, he still only got charged with one charge. But that's not exactly true. It was actually a two-count indictment that was unsealed on Monday, July 8th, 2019. And I know that seems like common knowledge, but I want to point it out because I want to focus on the second count. Everybody's talking about the sex trafficking. You can get plenty of news on that. But I want to talk about the charge of conspiracy. I mean, just think about that. If that's not great news, I don't know what is, because you can't have a one-man conspiracy. So the very fact that they had a sealed indictment with a charge of conspiracy shows that they have other sealed indictments in this case, that they are well aware that this is a conspiracy. And isn't that funny? After mocking us as conspiracy theorists all this time, now the United States government is actually charging these people with conspiracy. And of course, we don't know because they haven't unsealed the other indictments yet, and they're still calling for witnesses and victims to come forward so they can build a bigger case. And we'll be watching that unfold for quite a while. But I want to show you guys some absolutely shocking information. I know we have all the usual players from the last case down in Florida, and I think that's what a lot of people have just chalked it up to. Those people right there closest around him are the other people that would be charged in this conspiracy. But I want to show you guys some just shocking connections that tie the players in this Epstein case into the Nexium sex cult and the eerie similarities with the doctors and scientists involved. Like in the Nexium cult, remember that doctor was arrested for illegal human experiments? And then we have Jeffrey Epstein's foundation. He called himself a science philanthropist, right? And he was donating millions of dollars to these doctors and scientists for all of this strange, like human behavior research and genetic engineering and artificial intelligence and all of that type of thing. Eerie similarities to the same sort of thought process, the same types of experiments and interests that we saw in the Nazi camps and their medical experiments, that we saw carried forward with Project Paperclip and the MK Ultra programs that are declassified. But yeah, I just wanted to show you guys some of these absolutely mind-blowing connections between the Nexium sex cult, sex trafficking ring, and the Epstein players, and going all the way back through history, all the way to Jack Parsons and NASA, and it's just unbelievable. I mean, it's totally believable. It's everything we've been talking about for years. And like I said, we were called wacky conspiracy theorists, but now they've indicted this man on conspiracy. So let's take a look at some of these players. Let's start with the mansion that was raided in New York City. In court Monday, prosecutors revealed new evidence they say investigators uncovered in the weekend raid of Epstein's Manhattan mansion, which included nude photographs of what appeared to be underage girls. But as far as the conspiracy part of the charge, let's talk about the mansion itself. So here's just the front door of this mansion in New York City. It says the Upper East Side townhouse is said to be the largest private residence in all of New York City. I mean, already that's the most prestigious part of town. You cannot imagine how much property costs just to live there. And he has the largest private residence in all of New York City. It's 6 floors. It's like $77 million. The property tax record says that they negotiated it down somewhere in like the 60 range, but it clearly is every bit of a $77 million mansion, the largest private residence in New York City. So you can imagine you'd have to be a billionaire to buy this, right? Well, apparently not. Apparently, if you have the right pedo connections, these types of places are just given to you. So this is the first conspiracy connection that I want to talk about. That house, that mansion, he paid $10 for. And the guy who sold it to him, or essentially gave it to him for $10, was CEO Leslie Wexner. So why would Les Wexner give away the largest private residence in all of New York City? And why would he give it to Jeffrey Epstein? To just some guy that's not even blood related to him? And oddly enough, look, it was signed over to Epstein on the 23rd of December, 2011. And I'm sure that's just a total coincidence that that day falls on the morning after the winter solstice in 2011. And if you just clicked on this video looking for some Epstein news, that probably doesn't mean anything to you. But for those of us who have studied the Cabal and their Luciferian and their solstice rituals, that has a lot to do with everything. And yes, this is a real document. You can go down. Here's the archive address, newyorkcity.gov. This is a real public record. And it's not just my wild imagination trying to make links that aren't there, because Wexner was questioned in the Jeffrey Epstein case. You know, the Miami Herald, who has done some great work on this. And, you know, I'm not a big fan of mainstream type media, but I have to give credit to the Miami Herald for the work that they have done on this story. Okay, so anyway, here is an article from the Miami Herald from July 5th of 2019, and it's talking about a 2017 affidavit, a sworn affidavit from Stephen Zak. And he said that in this war between Dershowitz and the other attorneys, that Wexner was involved and he sat in on one of those meetings. A Boyaz partner based in Miami, Stephen N. Zak, however, said that starting in January of 2015, there was a series of conversations and meetings between BSF lawyers and Wexner's attorneys. Boyaz personally attended one of those meetings on July 8, 2015, Zak stated in a 2017 affidavit. And here's an article from back in 2008 by Nick Denton of Gawker, where he points out that Monday's creepily gentle profile in the New York Times suggested that Epstein charged annual fees upward of $25 million a year for quote unquote super elite financial advice. And he goes on to talk about other stories and profiles in New York Magazine and Vanity Fair where they won't list any of these clients. They're just fluff pieces. They seem to be complicit in building Epstein up as if he was some sort of financial advisor. But the people around Epstein say that he didn't have any sort of brilliant advice. In fact, he was sued by Michael Stroll. Michael Stroll, who sued Epstein over a failed business deal in the 2000s, told New York Magazine in 2007, "Everybody who's his friend thinks he's so darn brilliant because he's so darn wealthy. I never saw any brilliance. I never even saw him work. Anybody I know that is that wealthy works 26 hours a day. This guy plays 26 hours a day." And that's what everybody said. He had no experience at any of the jobs he was ever hired at. He had no college degrees. Even in his house, here's journalist Vicky Ward did this Vanity Fair piece about his mansion. And the part of the article about his office says, "Upstairs to the right of a spiral staircase is the office," in quotes, an enormous gallery spanning the width of the house. Strangely, it holds no computer. Computers belong in the computer room, a smaller room at the back of the house, Epstein has been known to say. Not he said that in the tour of the house, but see how Vanity Fair and all these places we're covering? Oh yeah, we went into his office and there was nothing in there that could be used for work, but you know, he's been known to say that computers are somewhere else in the house. Okay then. Anyway, back to Nick Denton's article. Epstein's wealth is built on a bizarre relationship with a single acknowledged client, Abercrombie and Fitch's creator, Leslie Wexner. And this is no small thing. This isn't just about the $77 million mansion that he gave to Epstein. These guys are tight. They're like freaking frack. They're intertwined in a zillion different ways. They're constantly giving money back and forth to each other. And I'll show you the business connections here in a second that link to the NXIVM, to the people involved in the NXIVM case. But just to prove the point of how tight Epstein and Wexner actually were, Epstein even helped arrange a visit to Wexner's home by the crew of cats. So close were they that Epstein was allocated a house near Wexner's in New Albany, Ohio. So it wasn't just New York. They had these homes stationed around the country and obviously other countries. So who is Les Wexner? I know a lot of people have never even heard that name. Wexner was born to a Jewish family in Dayton, Ohio, blah, 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 blah. He ended up owning everything retail. He owns Victoria's Secret, Lane Bryant, Bath and Body Works, of course, Pink, because that's part of Victoria's Secret, Candle Company, Lerner, New York, The Limited 2, which is now Tween Brands Inc. Tween, that's important that they changed the name to Tween Brands Inc. We're talking about little girls and little boys that are just not quite even teens. And why is that important? Because if you're old enough to remember the scandal with Abercrombie and Fitch, and how Les Wexner came under fire for all of these naked pictures of little children in his catalogs and had to pull the catalogs. Now, I don't know how many of you remember this because it has been almost 20 years ago now, 15 or 20 years. So it is absolutely not a stretch to connect this man and this company to pedophilia or pederasty, which would be the group from tweens to throughout teenagers. It's still children. And it's exactly the same age group that Epstein is currently charged with. Okay, so this is just one of the many scandals. And it was Christian conservatives started protesting the Abercrombie and Fitch catalogs because they were not only showing nude children as if this was some sort of legalized child porn or something. They just got away with it. They pulled the catalogs, but at the same time, they were never charged with anything. But okay, so listen to this. Too racy for retail, Abercrombie and Fitch pulls its naughty catalog. Perhaps it was the picture of a half dozen nearly naked teenagers entwined under the Christmas tree, like so many unwrapped presents. And we've seen that unwrapped presents thing before in the WikiLeaks emails. That some of these rich elitist billionaires used that exact terminology when they said, you know, you sent these Christmas presents to us, but you know, we always order little boys and you sent little girls, and it just horrific stuff. Okay, so the article goes on. Or maybe it was the words printed on the cover promising group sex and more. The latest edition of Abercrombie and Fitch's notoriously racy catalog so inflamed conservative groups that the teen clothing retailer was forced to recall it or face boycotts at its 651 stores. Abercrombie and Fitch, which began publishing a catalog 6 years ago, has recently courted controversy with pictures of young couples in sexually explicit poses and full frontal nudity. The current issue, known as the Christmas Field Guide, is no exception. This time, Abercrombie & Fitch goes even further, though, adding advice on oral sex and group sex. So they went beyond just, it's a clothing store, publishing pictures of children with no clothes on. You know, what is that? They're supposed to be selling clothes, but they're obviously not. They're grooming for pedophilia. And the catalog, which is supposed to be a clothing catalog, goes on to teach about orgies and oral sex to children. And is that not exactly what the testimony of the victims of Epstein said they went through? That's exactly how they do it. Here's the sworn affidavit testimony of Virginia Roberts. And she says, after they recruited her, over the next few weeks, Epstein and Maxwell trained me to do what they wanted, including sexual activities and the use of sexual toys. And you'll see in this Abercrombie and Fitch catalog, that's exactly what they were doing on a broader scale. It's exactly what I discussed in depth in that video series, The Age of Deceit, the Trans Agenda and Breeding Program, how they use MK Ultra on the masses Instead of doing it one at a time like they did in those introductory CIA programs, now they do it, they traumatize people en masse by using these media outlets and the news agencies and these world events and all of that type of thing. And then in the midst of all of this trauma, they're programming us to think perversion is normal. And I went even further in the full version video, Crimes Against Humanity, from the Kinsey Institute to New York. And unfortunately, only like 30,000 people watched that. And that's a shame because it starts out talking about New York's full-term abortion law that they passed. But if you watch it all the way through, I get into great depth about the Kinsey Institute, which was an MK Ultra program to instill sexual perversion. You've got to see that. If you haven't watched that, it is monumental what happened because of Alfred Kinsey in our nation and so many other nations. Okay, so back to the Abercrombie and Fitch catalog. And here's Christian conservative Dr. James Dobson, founder and chairman of Focus on the Family. He says, you can't sell orgies to 15-year-olds and not expect parents to react. But see, this is how we got here. This is why our little children are cutting their penises off and having surgical incisions cut between their pelvises and doing all sorts of perverse things because they have been trained by these people. They have been programmed since the day they were born. And we've just turned a blind eye to it. We've fought a few battles here and there, but no, we have not stood up and said these sex offenders, these Satanists will not run our world. So it's time to wake up. No tolerance, zero tolerance for these pedophiles. Okay, but this is what they did back then. All they did, they didn't get charged with child pornography. No, they were allowed to continue. They just pulled the catalog. Abercrombie in the past has made concessions to critics. The company now requires first-time buyers of the catalog, which sells for $4, to present proof that they are 18 or older. Okay, now think about that statement. This is a clothing company for teenagers, and yet they're saying you can't have our catalog unless you're an adult. Now, what is that? That is legalized child pornography. That's saying only adults can buy these pictures of these naked children. I mean, just think about the lunacy here. Outwardly, Abercrombie shows no sign of backing away from its risque image. Shirtless hunks posed for pictures with shoppers at Abercrombie's stores over the Thanksgiving weekend, part of a promotion to raise money for Toys for Tots. And here's just a couple of quotes from what is supposed to be, I mean, this ain't your mama's Sears catalog anymore. It says, an orgy can involve an unlimited quantity of potential lovers. Groups can be mixed gender or same sex, friendly or anonymous. Marketing to little kids. This is what they're grooming. This is pedo grooming. Outright and open. It's been going on. This is an article from 20 years ago with the very same players that are now being questioned in the Epstein case. And if you don't think they're grooming or teaching, listen to this quote about oral sex from the clothing catalog. If you're discreet, if there's no armrest between your seat and your partner's seat, and you happen to get tired during the movie, and if your head just ends up in your partner's lap, well, nobody can blame you for that. They're teaching, grooming children for oral sex in movie theaters like some freaking Pee Wee Herman nightmare. And we see this across the board from the mainstream media, not just Wexner and Abercrombie and Fitch and Epstein. We see this grooming. So they'll take, here's Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, right? Mickey Mouse Club. And they're so cute and sweet, and all of our little girls want to be just like them, and they're their heroes. And then they do this. They make them strip down to their underwear. They dress Madonna up like some S&M dominatrix. They make the little girls, the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse girls that all of our little children, our little girls have grown up with, right? They make them strip down to their underwear and make out with this woman that's, what, 23 years older than them? So back then when this happened, she was double their age. They've been steadily programming our children, grooming our children for perversion. Same way with Hannah Montana, right? Miley Cyrus. Oh, it's little cute, sweet Hannah Montana. And all of our little girls are like, I want to be just like Hannah Montana. And then they do this. They strip her down in a nude suit and make her bend over and do all this nasty stuff on stage with some guy dressed in a jail uniform. So that's what they teach our children. This is what they've been teaching our children. And we wonder how we got here. But I digress. This isn't about that. I've done tons of other videos on that. What this is about is conspiracy, the charge of conspiracy brought against a pedophile, and Wexner, and what we've seen with Abercrombie and Fitch. And here's just another story from about a year earlier. It was the summer of 2002. Tweens, from dolls to thongs. Now we're talking about tweens here. We're talking about 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. This says ages 7 to 14. And it goes on to talk about Abercrombie and Fitch putting 9 and 10-year-old girls in thongs, in thong underwear. I think it's appalling, sexualizing these girls at 9 and 10, said John Jones, a 59-year-old college instructor who accompanied his wife and niece on a recent shopping trip for the girl's 10th birthday. So I think you get my point. Surely you can see what Epstein and Wexner have in common. So it begs the question, what is this house? And why would he prepare a place like this and give it to somebody like Epstein? So let's take a look at this mansion and other people who have owned this mansion throughout history. Okay, so this house was originally built by Herbert Strauss, the Macy's department store heir. He died in 1933 before the mansion was completed. So let's take a look at Strauss, the Macy's department store Strauss. Okay, so you can see that Herbert Strauss was one of Isidore Strauss's children. Here he is. This is a picture of him, and he served in the U.S. House of Representatives. And look at this, preceded by Fitch, which will come into the Wexner's Abercrombie and Fitch family line as well. And he was born in Germany. If you guys have watched the Antarctica series and how I traced that all the way through the Gothic, when the German Goths took over the Catholic Church, and we had all the Gothic cathedrals, and it's just fascinating. But anyway, we're just talking about Epstein's mansion. It was built by the Strauss family, and Isidore Strauss was part of a 13-family alliance called the Mutual Alliance Trust Company. The Mutual Alliance Trust Company was a trust company formed in New York City in 1902 with founders such as Cornelius Vanderbilt and William Rockefeller. So the Strauss family was directly in an alliance called the Mutual Alliance Trust Company with all of the Illuminati families. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. Truth is so much stranger than fiction. But anyway, it all makes perfect sense, and here are the connections, some of the connections. Okay, so they built the mansion, the Illuminati built the mansion, and we know they are infamous for all of their secret chambers and tunnels and all of this stuff, okay? After Strauss died while he was building it, they donated it, again, changed hands without money, they donated it to the Roman Catholic Church, of course. And we all know that the Roman Catholic Church has a long history timeline. A look at the Catholic Church's sex abuse scandals spanning 3 decades. And we know it's way longer than that, but it's just talking about thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of children abused by priests. This says 4,444 numbers in Australia alone. They say what, over 16,000? That's just the ones who have come forward. And as I've pointed out in other videos, the Catholic Church hierarchy wears yarmulkes. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. Then Epstein's house was actually another private prep school. And that's when Les Wexner comes into the picture, and he buys the house and spends $13.2 million doing some sort of renovations in the house, and yet never lives in it. does the renovations and gives it to Epstein. When asked how long Mr. Wexner had occupied the property, Jeffrey Epstein, his protege and one of his financial advisors, replied, Les never spent more than 2 months there. In the 1996 story, The Times wrote that when, quote, reached in Florida last week, Mr. Epstein said the house was now his, unquote. Again, a suspicious note. That article was from 1996, where Epstein said that the house was already his. But the deed to the house filed with the state of New York shows that the house became Epstein's in 2011. But I tend to believe the former instead of the latter. I do believe that essentially Epstein was running whatever they were running out of that residence as early as 1996 and probably earlier. So we already touched on this mansion was built by the Illuminati. It was then gifted to the Catholic Church, then into the hands of this Les Wexner, who essentially gifted it to Jeffrey Epstein. Seeing anything in common with all of the people who owned, lived in, and used this mansion? Although we don't know yet what they will find in the mansion over time, we do know that they are trying to seize it. As a result of committing the offense alleged in count 2 of this indictment, count 2, conspiracy, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, shall forfeit to the United States, pursuant to Title 18, United States Code, blah, 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 any property, real and personal, da, da, da. And they list this mansion by name. Point A, the lot or parcel of land, together with its buildings, apertures, improvements, fixtures, attachments, easements, located at 9 East 71st Street, New York. Of course, we know during the raid on the mansion, the first thing the feds announced was that they found a vast trove of nude photos of what appeared to be underage girls in a safe in the New York mansion. And we have no idea yet if those are for personal use. They could be his catalog. Remember, that's what we saw with Ray Chandler. There's Ray Chandler on Epstein's plane with Bill Clinton, and this is Ray Chandler's Instagram, and she was advertising these children, just disheveled looking, desperate children covered in bruises and hickeys, and just advertising them publicly. She said this was a modeling agency, but you can see all of the children, they're not even clean. And we know now from all of the testimony from Virginia Roberts and everybody else who has come forward that when they recruited these young girls, then they made these young girls recruit others. And that's the same exact thing that we saw in the Nexium cult. It was almost like a pyramid scheme. But anyway, my point is just because there were pictures found in Epstein's safe, we don't know yet if those were for his personal sickness or if that was his catalog, like this was Ray Chandler's catalog. Okay, so besides this pyramid scheme of child pornography pictures, let's look at some of the other things we know were in his home, both from sources like the Vanity Fair articles as well as the raid. They found a hanging woman, effigy of a woman, a mannequin, a nude mannequin hanging from a chandelier. They found, here it was, the entrance hall is decorated not with paintings, but with row upon row of individually framed eyeballs. These, the owner tells people with relish, were imported from England, where they were made for injured soldiers. A twice life-size sculpture of a naked African warrior. Chairs covered in leopard print, classy. And on the wall hangs a huge oriental fantasy of a woman holding an opium pipe. Rows and rows of framed eyeballs and opium pipes. If that doesn't smack of cabal, I don't know what does. But this is the part I really wanted to point out that I find the most interesting. It's the hidden rooms. They found several hidden rooms with all sorts of surveillance equipment. Visitors described a bathroom reminiscent of James Bond movies, hidden beneath a stairway lined with lead, supplied with closed-circuit television screens and a telephone, both concealed in a cabinet beneath the sink. Unimaginable, but real. So it makes you wonder, who did those renovations? Were those renovations that Wexner put in? Is that what he did? Was that what the 13 million in renovations that he did right before he just gave it away to Epstein for $10? Or are those things that Epstein put in? You know how Michael Jackson, he put all those tripwire, laser wire, and surveillance and stuff so that he had some sort of layers of protection to protect him from being discovered in his crimes. And I don't know, but it is interesting to discuss some of this circumstantial evidence. I know one thing, there's no denying Jeffrey Epstein must be the luckiest guy in the whole world at real estate to buy a $77 million mansion for $10. Or it's probably his math skills because he's so brilliant at math and investing. I mean, he's got to be the luckiest math teacher in the whole world, right? I mean, just the fact that he is a math teacher and doesn't even have a college degree, that makes him pretty lucky. That he was teaching physics at one of the most prestigious prep schools in New York City. He's just a high school graduate who got that job at 20 years old. Gosh, that makes him pretty lucky too. Lucky guy. And again, not a conspiracy theory. It's always been right out here on the open. Here's his Wikipedia page stating that he attended a few classes at Cooper Union and at New York University, but left without receiving a degree. 20 years old when one of the most prestigious Ivy League prep schools hired him. But again, it makes perfect sense when you start to see the similarities and you find out that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't the only sexual predator associated with that Dalton school. There's an article, former Dalton School headmaster sexually abused student. A former student at the Dalton School charges in a lawsuit that the renowned institution's ex-headmaster sexually abused her as a 14-year-old girl in the 1980s. The plaintiff claims Gardner Dunnan groped and sexually touched her on 4 separate occasions at his Upper East Side apartment and his Jersey Shore house in 1986 and 1987. Okay, got sidetracked just a little bit there, but before I get into all of the science connections with the scientists and the doctors and all of the massive donations, I want to jump back to Les Wexner one more time. Les Wexner, who is deeply intertwined with Jeffrey Epstein and his connections with people who are also in the Nexium case. Okay, this is a Wall Street Journal article from May 4th of 1998 called Titans of Industry Join Forces to Work for Jewish Philanthropy. Again, under the guise of philanthropy, which is the same thing we saw with Epstein and his donations. But here's the important part. Wexner. This group was informally known as the Mega Group, in quotes, the Mega Group, a loosely organized club of 20 of the nation's wealthiest and most influential Jewish businessmen, formed 7 years ago by Leslie Wexner. There's Les Wexner, and who else of all people? Charles Bronfman. And actually, there were 2 Bronfman brothers in the mega group. The other brother is named Edgar Bronfman, and he's the one to keep an eye on when we're talking about the Nexium sex trafficking. And look who else was in the mega group, Steven Spielberg. Again, have we heard that any of these people have anything in common? Of course, I have to say, Steven Spielberg has never been charged in the case of Heather Rourke's death or anything of that nature, so they're only allegations. But as far as similarities, yes, Heather O'Rourke was not even an actress who came in through an agent and got picked for the roles. She was actually on a tour with her parents, and he scouted her. He recruited her, a non-actress, to come work with him in the studio. And she did. She did a few films with him. And that ended in her death on set. 3 men were alone with her. And then they came out and they called the medics, and it resulted in her death. She had been with him for years, so she was 12 years old when she passed away from intestinal stenosis after a bowel obstruction had caused a fatal infection that brought on septic shock, resulting in cardiac arrest. Anyway, Steven Spielberg was never charged in any of that, so everything that I just said about Steven Spielberg's involvement in Heather O'Rourke's death or in a Hollywood pedophile ring are all alleged, air quotes implied. What is known to be fact, though, is that Steven Spielberg was indeed part of this mega group with Les Wexner and the Bronfman brothers, Edgar and Charles Bronfman of the Seagram Company fortune. And remember that about Seagram, because that'll come in later when we're talking about Bear Stearns and the 2008 financial collapse. But for now, let's just focus on the Bronfman connections to both Wexner and the Epstein sex trafficking case and his own daughter, Claire Bronfman, in the NXIVM sex trafficking case. He just happens to be Claire Bronfman's dad, who pleads guilty in the NXIVM sex trafficking, human slavery, sex cult. Right here, Claire Bronfman, heir to the Seagram's liquor fortune, an heiress who used her trust money to bankroll the legal battles of an alleged cult leader, has pled guilty to 2 criminal counts separated from her previous indictment for racketeering. Bronfman was the operations director and the primary financial contributor to the NXIVM sex cult. And if you recall, both of the Bronfman daughters, Sarah and Claire, were both involved in the NXIVM sex trafficking case. Sarah Bronfman was the initial one involved in the NXIVM scandal, and she brought her sister Claire in later. And you can find all of that on their Wikipedia pages. Both of them have a section called Involvement in NXIVM. But as you've probably noticed, if you've studied this for any length of time at all of the cabal members are involved in tons of different groups, like the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. They're sent everywhere, and they just go under, what's she known for? What's Sarah Bronfman known for? Philanthropy and humanitarianism. They don't ever have, it's like Epstein, they don't ever have any real jobs. Nobody can ever tell where the money really comes from. Yet they have audience with everybody, from the Dalai Lama to the dictators of the world. They're involved in restructuring governments, and they're nobody. They have no credentials at all other than a seemingly endless supply of money. So yeah, in addition to Sarah Bronfman being involved in the NXIVM sex trafficking case, she was also involved in Libya and Benghazi, and she was sent in with her team of humanitarians, right, and philanthropists after Gaddafi was assassinated.
Unconfirmed report.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
He died.
Did it have anything to
They toured post-Gaddafi Libya and presented their multi-phase reintegration program, which was accepted by the local authorities of Benghazi, who were appointed by the Libyan National Transitional Council. So I know that all sounds like a mouthful, but what it means is this Arab Spring that was orchestrated for the overthrow of governments that were in resistance to the cabal. Remember all of that stuff with Hillary Clinton, with Benghazi, and the assassination of Gaddafi while she was Secretary of State. Well, while all that was going on, these people, Bronfman of the NXIVM case, don't forget that, was then sent in to this foreign country to present this transition plan to the leaders. So what are the odds that Les Wexner would be in bed with the Bronfmans, who are bankrolling the NXIVM sex trafficking setup, and also be in bed with Jeffrey Epstein, who is running this thing he's running that we are yet to see unfold in court documents. You might believe in coincidence. You might even believe in 50 coincidences all in one case. But as for me, this clearly looks like a much larger, multi-armed human trafficking pedophile cult. It smacks of the cabal. It's mind-boggling, but it's true. There is a cult that is so huge that it has taken control of the world. It has infiltrated every single nation in our world. And they have overlaid their cult practices onto every nation. And now we call it our culture, although some of us are resisting. The resistance says literally we are in a culture war. Look around you. Look at the perversion. Look at what they have done. They have programmed our descendants in all of our nations to be unwitting practitioners of their cult practices. This is real. They have spent generations building this thing right under our noses. They have built a military industrial complex around us. And not just a prison for our bodies, they have built a prison for our minds through their propaganda networks. And remaining in denial about what is going on in our world isn't going to save us. If people would have listened to the truthers instead of mocking them and calling them conspiracy theorists and all of this, if they would have listened generations ago when people were pointing this stuff out all around us, then our children, my child, would not have been born into bondage. But they didn't. People chose to bury their head in the sand and do nothing, to turn the other way and pretend this isn't happening. But this is happening. This is happening. Conspiracies do happen. Jeffrey Epstein is indicted on a charge of conspiracy. People conspire together to do evil things, just like people work together in corporations and companies and families to do wonderful things. People do conspire together to do unholy things, even things as unholy as child sex trafficking. It is real. Okay, so here's where I think I should break in, because if you've never watched any videos on my channel and you don't know anything about me, you might start to make the connections that so many others have been duped into making and saying, oh, well, look, Epstein's a Jew, Wexman's a Jew, Spielberg, the mega group, they're all Jews. See? And you might fall for that lie of anti-Semitism. Please don't do that. That's what they want you to do. This cabal, they are not really Jews. They infiltrate everything. They have chosen that so that they are untouchable. They have also chosen it because they descend from the ancient Babylonian families, the ancient Babylonian mystery schools, the ancient Babylonian Talmud beliefs, the Kabbalah. That's where we get the word cabal for witches and that type of thing. They are Frankists. They are Sabbateans. If you don't know about that part of world history, please research it. I've got a whole series coming on it, but if you don't believe me, go back and check Jakob Frank and the Sabbateans and how in 1666 they believed their Messiah came, who was this Antichrist figure who believed in doing all sin and all the orgies and all the incest and all of it that you see in the Illuminati. And then when he died, then Jakob Frank picked up and said that he was the reincarnation of this Messiah, this anti-Messiah. And he was the one who met in Bavaria with Weishaupt in the 1700s and established the Illuminati. This is real world history. This sect of people were banished by the Jews. They were cast out. It's in the writings that the Frankists, and I think they said their families for 10 generations, were excommunicated, were absolutely banned from the people practicing the Jewish religion around the world. So please do not blame what we might call regular Jews, people practicing this religion all over the world. Don't blame them for the cabal. This is a very specific cabal of evil people, and they have nothing to do with Judaism. They are an ancient Babylonian cult. So please hear the word of God. This is the word of God from the book of the Revelation. That means the unveiling. In the time of the revelation, Jesus Christ says, I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars. I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Revelation 2:9. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Please, this is the word of God. I have seen so many well-meaning truthers, well-meaning Christians who are out there propagating some type of anti-Semitism because they see the obvious connections that these people claim to be Jews. But that's the end of it. They claim to be, but they are not. They are liars. Please know that, because if you fall back into that anti-Semitism, you are falling exactly into the Hitler-esque mindset. Because you know Hitler was the biological grandson of the Vienna Rothschilds. That's why they always claimed that Hitler was a closet Jew and all of that. Yet he persecuted the real Hebrews. Just because the Illuminati have chosen to operate under this umbrella of the untouchables that nobody can question, there's this class of people that nobody can say anything about, or you'll be considered anti-Semitic and a hater and all of that type of thing. That's why they've chosen it. That's the very definition of Antichrist. Antichrist doesn't just mean against, it means against or instead of Christ, in place of Christ. This is the false. They are not the Hebrews. The Hebrew race in the Bible are the descendants of Adam. Hebrew race means human race. We are all one race, the human race, with one Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ. They are ushering in an imposter, the instead of, their replacement, the imposter. They are a very literal cult that is impersonating the Hebrew lineage, specifically the tribe of Judah and the northern tribes often referred to as the Jews. It's all fake. They are liars and criminals. They are a crime syndicate. So please, please, please do not be duped. Do not fall into the trap that they have laid for us and the truther community to come out, because that's what they're preaching, right? That's what their Antifa and all of their leftists, that's what they're preaching. They want us to look like Hitler. Just don't fall for their trick. The Jews are not our enemies. The Jews are our brothers and sisters. I am a Judeo-Christian. I believe the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. The Old Testament is the Torah, not to be confused with the Talmud, which is Babylonian, but the Torah. The humans who believe the Torah, the Old Testament, but have not yet received the Messiah are no different than your neighbors. We have lots of lost brothers and sisters around us who have not yet received the Messiah. That's what we're out here doing, trying to wake people up and draw them out of the occult New Age movement. Draw them out of this secular culture, this atheist culture, all of the different cultures that they have set up as traps for people's souls. Okay, I'm done talking about this, but I felt the need to really point this out because there are so many people in that, protected class that we aren't allowed to criticize in this video, including Dershowitz, Epstein's own attorney. We know that Alan Dershowitz is famous for being Jeffrey Epstein's attorney, who was allegedly intimidating witnesses and paying people off and doing all this stuff to cover up for Jeffrey Epstein. But in reality, Alan Dershowitz isn't just Epstein's attorney. He's also alleged to be a co-conspirator who took part in the pedophile activities in this case, in this specific case. A co-conspirator, not just counsel for Epstein. Virginia Roberts, in her sworn affidavit in the 1983 court documents, says specifically, I had sexual intercourse with Dershowitz at least 6 times. The first time when I was about 16, early on in my servitude to Epstein, and it continued until I was 19. And this can be found in the same affidavit, in the same court record, where she says, this is Virginia Roberts right here when she was young. This is the infamous picture of her with Prince Andrew. And there's Maxwell back there. We'll get to her and her family in just a second. But there's no denying that Virginia Roberts is telling the truth. Here is a runaway. She was a runaway from Florida. How on earth does an underage runaway from Florida end up hobnobbing with Prince Andrew, standing there with his arm around her waist, with Maxwell, who works for the billionaire Jeffrey Epstein? But anyway, she says in that same affidavit, Epstein made me have sex with Prince Andrew several times. Prince Andrew, Maxwell, and I are shown in the photograph below. I had sex with him 3 times, including 1 orgy. I knew he was a member of the British royal family, but I just called him Andy. Okay, we'll loop back around to Maxwell and we'll close the video out with that. But first, I want to touch on these doctors and scientists that were receiving money and were working with these sex traffic rings, whether it be Epstein or Nexium. I'll start with Nexium. So you guys probably remember Dr. Brandon Porter was working with the Nexium sex trafficking ring, the cult, in illegal human experiments. Nexium doctor accused of conducting illegal human experiments in fright study. So essentially what he was doing was brain scans while they were inflicting trauma on people. So they would show them pictures of just horrific stuff that I don't want to say, but you can imagine dismemberment and the stuff that these people do. Well, they would make these people watch it while they did these brain scans, and supposedly there were a number of reasons for this, but clearly brain mapping is one of them, and that's important to remember when we get to who Jeffrey Epstein was also contributing to. But I also want to point out that this is an MK Ultra connection. You have to admit, this is like the newer high-tech version of the exact same type of MK Ultra trauma-based mind control projects that were being studied all the way back to Joseph Mengele in the Nazi camps, and then they came over in Project Paperclip, and then we had the MK Ultra program that was functioning until 1973. Right here, Project MK Ultra, also called the CIA Mind Control Program. The operation was officially sanctioned in 1953, was reduced in scope in 1964, further curtailed in 1967, and recorded to be halted in 1973. And that's because it became public knowledge. And remember, there were all of those hearings with the Church Committee and the United States Congress and the United States President's Commission on CIA Activities. All of this can be verified on the actual CIA.gov website with the FOIA requests, and there are tons and tons of documents that have been declassified on MK Ultra. Not a conspiracy theory, an actual program. And of course, most people fully understand and believe that although it is recorded to be halted in 1973, that the program continued on but just went underground. It's just another one of those black projects, if you will, those black ops that nobody's allowed to know about. So isn't it a coincidence when they went off the record in 1973, this MK Ultra program, that's the exact same time that this man, Jeffrey Epstein, with no credentials, no experience, no degrees, shows up on the scene out of nowhere and gets placed right in the midst of the most elite family lines and placed in a children's prep school nonetheless. Project MK Ultra goes off the books in 1973. And Jeffrey Epstein, a total nobody, pops up out of nowhere and gets hired at Dalton School in Manhattan in 1973. I know, so I must be a crazy conspiracy theorist to think that there would be any connections between Jeffrey Epstein coming out of some sort of CIA program or having any connections at all to the intelligence agencies or the Justice Department. That's crazy. Really? Because it was Attorney General William Barr's father who hired Epstein at that school with no credentials, no experience, no degrees. And again, not a conspiracy theory, not even a theory. It's a fact. William Barr admitted it and recused himself from the Jeffrey Epstein case because it was his father who had hired Jeffrey Epstein at that school. Hey, at least he did recuse himself immediately and admit it and step down so he's not taking part in the case. Let's see if we see the same thing out of Comey's daughter, because she's highly involved. You know, everybody's Acosta. Oh, he did this dirty deal for Epstein. You know who signed off on that federal deal for Epstein? Comey and Mueller. How come nobody's talking about them? They signed off on a non-prosecution agreement that not only gave him that super deal, but something that's never been heard of. In the agreement, they wrote in that none of the conspirators can be charged. Immunity for all of the conspirators as well. Well, I wonder why that would be. Immunity for conspirators who haven't even been charged yet in the case. Who writes that in? And who signs off on it? I know two people who signed off on it. These two feds right here. In fact, one of the good guys in this case, believe it or not, there were two good guys who stood out, two white hats who stood out in the Epstein investigation in Florida. One of them was a police investigator, and one of them was this Palm Beach police chief from 2001 to 2009, Michael Ryder. Now, when he was pressured to drop the Epstein case on that local level, when he realized he was dealing with local corruption, like the Miami Herald reported on Rick Bradshaw in the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, instead of dropping the case under that pressure, he took it up higher over their heads and he took the case to the FBI. But as you see, a lot of good that did him, because who was in charge of the FBI? Comey, which can be looked at two different ways. Obviously, if they are involved, and we know that Comey and these guys are dirty dogs, we know they're corrupt. So no doubt they're conspirators with the cabal, but it can be looked at an additional way too. There's been a lot of talk about, was the deal crafted, the non-prosecution agreement and the immunity for all of the conspirators, was that crafted because Epstein was a CIA asset? Like, here's just one article where they raised questions. Did Jeffrey Epstein become a government informant as part of the sweetheart plea deal? And this is where Bear Stearns comes in, that I said to remember, because we'll get to it later. And there's just so much more to it, but I just can't do it all in one video. But we know that Epstein provided valuable consideration, quote unquote, in other words, critical information to federal investigators. Epstein was considered to be a crucial witness during the trial of two Bear Stearns executives who faced allegations of corporate security fraud during the 2008 financial crisis. And we know that Epstein worked for Bear Stearns. That's where he went right after he left the teaching job. He, again, no credentials, no experience, nothing. He went into the stock exchange in the top, richest, biggest company, Bear Stearns. And he has connections to the Justice Department, and the Attorney General's father's the one who hired him, and on and on and on and on. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Here's a little clip from The Blaze, and it's irrelevant to me whether you love or hate Glenn Beck. What is important here is what he says, so please try to overcome your prejudice and just listen to his words, because in this clip, he makes a good point.
Now, not only did this deal get him off easy, but it also immunized him and his co-conspirators from prosecution. Now, I don't think I've ever heard of anything like this happening before. This was a potential of unveiling of a system of elites all over the world bartering in underage human beings, and nothing was going to happen. No justice was going to be served. How is this possible? Well, there's a woman that has been a journalist and been covering this case since 2003. Her name is Vicky Ward. She wrote an article this week that mentions something that I think might be explosive enough to blow up a good portion of our system. In an interview she had with a former White House official, the topic of Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta came up. Now, Acosta was the U.S. attorney in Miami that offered Epstein that ridiculous plea deal. And everybody's saying, I've never heard of anything like this. How could this have happened? Well, the Trump transition team apparently asked Acosta about the plea deal. And this is how he responded. He said he was told by someone in power to back off, that Epstein was above his pay grade. I want to give this to you as an exact quote. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Is this implying that Epstein was working with an intelligence agency as some sort of asset?
Okay, now to imply that Jeffrey Epstein may have been an intelligence asset is not at all to imply that he's a good guy working for any good cause. We know that the CIA has been riddled with corruption and have been responsible for untold human suffering. And of course, we know 100% fact that the United States government and tons of other governments have been complicit in doing human experimentation against the knowledge of the humans they were experimenting on, i.e., the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where they were purposely infecting humans and denying them treatment so that they could watch them suffer and document the progression of the disease unto death. So no, it's absolutely not beyond the scope of reason to think that the CIA could engage in human experimentation, or the MK Ultra experiments, or these new human experiments being done through the Nexium cult and Epstein's human trafficking rings. In fact, if you look back at some of the patents that this genius, you know, they say that Keith Raniere has this just astronomical IQ super genius. Well, he had applied for several patents, and get this, he outright talks in the patent application about Luciferian behavior. He actually uses the word Luciferian. No joke. You just can't make this stuff up. Determination of whether a Luciferian can be rehabilitated. And here's the U.S. patent number. It's patent pending, and from what I understand, it was obviously dropped because he got arrested. But just kind of listen to the abstract. An aspect of the present invention is a method for determining whether a Luciferian can be rehabilitated. The method includes stimulating the Luciferian with a first stimulus and recording a first psychological response by the Luciferian to the said first stimulus. And it goes on and on and on with visual stimulus and stimulating the different senses and using an algorithm to do that. Okay, is this not MK Ultra? Is this not exactly what they do and what they're doing to us right now, using the algorithms to stimulate us and the biofeedback loops through Facebook and stuff to constantly give us the dopamine hits, to get us to keep following and to keep submitting. But anyway, the founder of the Nexium sex trafficking ring says that he wanted to use this to find out if a Luciferian can be rehabilitated. Makes you wonder if that was a cry for help, or if this is reverse MK Ultra. This is what he knows they use for their cult, and he's trying to get a patent for it to deprogram people. I don't know. He sure didn't seem very repentant. But I wanted to point it out because one, it obviously confirms what I'm suggesting about MK Ultra programs continuing through these human trafficking cults that we are seeing being prosecuted right now. And two, it shows that we're not just crazy out of touch people by suggesting that Luciferianism is involved in this, because they themselves speak about Luciferianism. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the scientists and programs that Jeffrey Epstein donated to through his so-called charitable foundations. Throughout this section, I'm going to be playing some clips from Amazing Polly. If you guys haven't checked out her channel, please do. She does some fantastic work over there. So I'll put the links below down in the description box. And she has a video that she put up a little bit ago called Jeffrey Epstein and Mad Scientists. So she has a lot of connections in there, and a lot of her work and my work overlap, not just on Epstein. She talks about smart cities and 5G and all of the same types of things that we all talk about. So again, please do go over and check out her channel. You're really missing out if you don't. But anyways, as I'm talking about these connections, there will be some overlap where I'm just going to drop in from time to time clips from Polly. Okay, so let's just start here. Her video is like almost an hour long. I'm just gonna graze through about 5 minutes of these and then I'll pop in some clips. So here are a couple of big connections from the Jeffrey Epstein Foundation, where he had given large sums of money to Martin Novak and Marvin Minsky. So this Marvin Minsky is from the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab. Minsky started developing what came to be known as the Society of Mind theory. The theory attempts to explain how what we call intelligence could be the product of the interaction of non-intelligent parts. So essentially, neural implants, or androids, no pun intended, using smartphones to link into the human mind with artificial intelligence, and all of this same type of behavior control and mind theory. So you can see it didn't take us more than 60 seconds to establish the link that, again, this is MK Ultra, mind theory, mind control, behavioral modification. And from the Jeffrey Epstein Foundation site, Jeffrey Epstein is a former member of the Mind, Brain, and Behavior Committee at Harvard. I mean, that pretty much says it all, right? That sums it up. And how does a guy with just a high school diploma get on such a committee at Harvard University? Epstein is also a member of the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the New York Academy of Science, and a former Rockefeller University board member. Okay, so on to Martin Novak. Who is he? He works on the mathematical description of evolutionary processes, including the evolution of cooperation and human language, as well as the dynamics of virus infections. And the viral thing may not seem related, but it really could be. If you go over to my technology and science playlist and you go through my videos, you can go down to, here it is. It's one with the human genome there. It says 8% on it. It says, are they putting DNA in us? Viruses, men in black, biological warfare, yada, yada. But that's about 8% of the human genome has already been replaced through viruses. That's a form of gene therapy that they use to cure people. You hollow out a virus and you put the snippet of DNA that you want transplanted into somebody, and then you expose them to the virus. It's that easy. You don't necessarily need a neural implant as we would think, a mechanical device. You can implant snippets of DNA. So the fact that they are working on all of these things simultaneously, they are working on artificial intelligence, they're setting up this 5G network around us. They have people working on the viruses to implant, not just neural implants like Elon Musk talks about, but actual implants in our DNA to change us. evolution, the evolution of cooperation, that they believe that they are in charge of evolving our biology. Oh, and a quick side note, while we are talking about Martin Novak, here's a paper on dynamics of prebiotic RNA reproduction illuminated by chemical game theory that shows that Martin Novak worked with award-winning scientist Niles Lehmann. This is Niles Lehmann, who received the 2018 OAS Outstanding Science Award. He is a professor of chemistry at Portland State, working to discover knowledge about the biochemical aspects of the origins of life. Or I guess I should say he was, because as of April 9th, 2019, he has been arrested for child pornography. Portland State University professor who was Oregon's Scientist of the Year facing child porn charges. Just happened to be working together with Martin Novak, whom Epstein finances. Santa Fe Institute, another one he gave big money to. Swarm engineering across scales. How do collective effects shape crypto networks? Now, this is what we're talking about with the blockchain and the hive mind. Blockchain and hive mind, all linked into this 5G, and the smart cities, where they will be beaming frequencies directly over us through our smartphones, through our Wi-Fi systems in our homes, and all of that won't have to be interpreted through some device. It will be interpreted in our bodies. Okay, so here I'm going to pop in a clip of Polly talking about that, how we already have devices that can be implanted in the body that interact with our smartphones and tell our body what to do and what chemicals to produce. And so she's talking about people who have diabetes, and that this is a technology that they can use. They can be monitored through their smartphone, and it will tell their body what to produce.
Something that was on the Santa Fe Institute's website was this Miyakoshi M. ECOG Dog's Dream. So they're talking there about, do electroencephalographs read the brain deeply enough for them to have a good understanding of it? And this guy says no. He says a true groundbreaking advance in the brain science needs a hardware breakthrough, namely a chronically implanted ultra-high density wireless ECOG system. ECOG, that's his company, that's his research, and its collective database to perform data mining. And he says he proposes launching a venture company that sells ECOG dogs whose minds owners can read with smartphones. What this says to me is that they're trying to find a way to soften up the idea of implantable devices. They already can control your brain through smartphones. They're doing it already with diabetics. They can implant something into your body, and then it works with an app on your smartphone. It literally reads your biochemistry. And if you are having an insulin spike or whatever it is, the phone and this device communicate with each other automatically, and it makes your brain activate the systems in your body to combat it. They've come very far. Look up optogenetics. I've done several videos about this sort of thing, which maybe I'll link to in the description box. Another thing Jeffrey Epstein is funding is this micro-psi project, Cognitive Artificial Intelligence. You can see here it is part of the Program for Evolutionary Dynamics. That is this guy, Martin Novak. Cognitive AI, Jeffrey Epstein Foundation, micro-psi is grateful for received support from the Jeffrey Epstein Foundation. This is an article about OpenPsi and OpenCog. It says science funder Jeffrey Epstein launches radical emotional software for the gaming industry. This is in 2013, so think how far it's probably come since then. What it says here is, while it intends to make a profit, they are primarily interested in using a virtual platform to test their hypothesis about the mind. The disparity between these models and our experience of the mind is an invaluable guide to follow, Jeffrey Epstein remarked. And down here we see that OpenPsi is based on Dietrich Dorner's theory that animal behavior is driven by 5 basic needs. First of all, have they replaced Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because this Dietrich Dorner theory is very, very similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But you know how these scientists are, right? I just have to wonder why they suddenly are all talking about Dorner. Was he part of the Frankfurt School, the New School, by any chance? What it says here is the 5 basic drives are existence preservation, food, water, body integrity, avoidance of pain. Species preservation, sexuality, reproduction. Affiliation, the need to belong to a group and social interaction. Certainty, the need to predict events and their consequences. And competence, capacity to master problems and tasks. Each of these needs gets filled or depleted based on time and interaction with various atoms. That's how they're designing the artificial intelligence. But they need to model the artificial intelligence off of actual human behavior. How are they studying these people? How are they studying that need, those needs, and what happens when those needs aren't fulfilled? How are they crafting scenarios, I wonder, to map the brain so that they can program the AI? A lot of those, but not all, could be fulfilled through social media. So that's an interesting thing to think about. You know, right now, how everything feels very uncertain? Well, that would be an experiment on one of those hierarchy of needs, one of those Dorner needs, certainty. You know, how social acceptance is one of the needs. Social media is perfect for experimenting on large swaths of people and then following them. Do they make a purchase after they've been rejected? What do they do? Do they complain? Do they seem angry? With all of the surveillance that we're under, especially from our smart devices, they are building their AI models, I think, partly off of the internet.
Okay, so she nailed it, but there are a few things that I would like to add to her commentary. The first one, speaking about social media, you'll notice that it doesn't just list Jeffrey Epstein as the financial guru behind this effort. It says along with the Hong Kong government. So we have communist China involved also with Epstein in this sort of social experiment and behavior control, which is especially interesting knowing that China has already launched their social credit score, where it's proven what she was theorizing about them using the Internet of Things to surveil us and control our behavior and that type of thing. The other thing that's interesting is it was software for the gaming industry. The gaming industry. So not just, Facebook and social media, but they have been programming our children through gaming, which has really escaped a lot of us, the older generation, because we weren't glued to Fortnite or World of Warcraft 18 hours a day. We were actually out in the real world, like with real people and real animals and real landscapes. But this generation has lived so much of their life in virtual reality, and parents just sort of walked away as if they were watching television. And that was bad enough with Hollywood and everything, but at least it wasn't interactive. So when you spend more of your waking life in a virtual reality rather than in reality, it confuses your senses. It disassociates you, which is part of multiple personality disorder, or DID. It's a step to disassociate people from their own bodies, from their own environments, from reality. Now there is a generation that has had radical emotional, behavioral mind control employed on them practically their entire lives. And we've seen that again and again with instances like the school shootings. And right here in my small town, in this community, in a small rural town, there was I believe it was a 13-year-old boy that was shot by a 15-year-old boy over a Fortnite game. And here's another sad example from communist China, where a Chinese man was stabbed to death by a fellow gamer over a virtual sword that only existed in the game, Legend of Mir 3, I guess. So he had this really rare virtual item in the game, and I guess he lent it to another player who, instead of giving it back to him in the game, sold it. So here, this is a 41-year-old man. And I guess he tried to report it to the police, but the police are like, it doesn't exist. You're talking about an item that doesn't exist, right? Like this was a game. You guys were playing a game, like a pretend game. And the guy's like, no, but it did exist. Like it existed to me. It was mine. And the police are like, the sword didn't exist. It was in your imagination. It's a game. You're playing a game. It's not real. It's a game. And no, he didn't, he couldn't handle that. So 41-year-old man took matters into his own hands, broke into the other guy's house, confronted him. And I won't continue to read this because the last person who did, they took their YouTube video down. But suffice it to say that he can get life in prison if he behaves himself. It could be as short as 15 years in jail for something that didn't exist in a landscape that doesn't really exist, that is not reality, that is virtual reality. So surely you can see that this radical emotional research, mind manipulation research that Jeffrey Epstein was funding in the gaming industry, it's important. It's very important. It is taking control of the minds of men. This is MK Ultra, modern day MK Ultra, leading up to the rise of the Antichrist, who will mimic God's omnipresence and omniscience through this neural link, a neural implant or a neural link that will then make all humans nodes on this blockchain, will make all humans part of this corporate entity, and thus humans will lose their free will. The Bible says the people who take the mark of the beast, this genetic upgrade or this neural implant, will no longer be able to ever be saved, because they will no longer have free will. They will have given their will over to the beast. Which takes me back to the last thing I wanted to add to her commentary when they were talking about that. Finally, I will discuss a thought experiment of launching a venture company that sells ECOG dogs whose minds owners can read with smartphones. This ECOG technology is about reading people's minds with smart devices. This is the brain mapping. This is brain mapping. All of these scientific endeavors that these human trafficking cults in Nexium and Epstein's case all point to the very same end game.
Here's one of the guys they mentioned there, George Church. It says about his research that he's in an emerging area of neuroscience that proposes to map brain activity and establish a functional connectome. What's a connectome? A connectome is a comprehensive map of neural connections in the brain and may be thought of as a wiring diagram. Indeed, the foundation of human cognition lies in the pattern of dynamic interactions shaped by the connectome.
Okay, there's so much more. I could go on like this all night, but I'm going to close out with Ghislaine Maxwell, who is this woman here who was in the picture with the victim, Virginia Roberts, and Prince Andrew. Now, a lot of people naturally assumed that the conspiracy charges were limited to her because she was like his secretary / personal assistant / pilot, and I guess was his girlfriend, Epstein's girlfriend at one time, and all of that. Ended up being sort of the madam, and I don't know if you can call somebody a madam because these aren't prostitutes. It's statutory rape. It's rape to coerce and convince a child to partake in actions with adults like this. But for lack of a better word, that was her job description, recruiting and pimping. But I want to end this video by showing you her family and how big the conspiracy really is. She wasn't in Jeffrey Epstein's life by accident or just because she was his girlfriend or anything of that nature. So let's take a look at her family.
Remember, Jeffrey Epstein's procurer is Ghislaine Maxwell. Her father is Robert Maxwell. He had a bunch of aliases, by the way, and that could be because he was an intelligence asset. not necessarily MI6, but he was military intelligence. He was in the army. There's a big long story about how he was in Czechoslovakia or Hungary, and then France fell to the Nazis, and then he got sent to London, supposedly. And then he was in London, and he just happened to charm some army officer who said, hey, you should be in intelligence. And right away, supposedly, they sent him to Germany to be the controller of information and public relations. I'm getting all of this from this book, Scandal, an explosive expose of the affairs, corruption, and power struggles of the rich and famous. In this book, we learn that while in Germany, all publishers of any sort of material had to get Robert Maxwell's permission first. But in his position, it meant that he could circumvent any regulations he wanted. So this puts him essentially as censor for all information funneling through Germany in any way. The other things we learn in this book are that he met up with people who were science publishers, and eventually he became the largest distributor of scientific works in Britain. We also hear about his time as an MP for Buckingham, and how at that time he was met on a train by someone who took him to see apparently the head of the KGB. They convinced him to convince the House of Parliament in Britain not to interfere when Russia was going to roll their tanks into Czechoslovakia to put down a leader that they didn't like, Alexander Dubček. The Russians bailed out his businesses of publishing scientific journals and scientific textbooks. And that's the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who is partners with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Robert Maxwell had 7 children. I'm not going to talk about all of them today, but I do want to talk about numbers 3, 5, and 9. Just briefly, number 9, that's Anne Maxwell. She became a Montessori teacher and now is a hypnotherapist, apparently. This is interesting to me because when you think about the science that Jeffrey Epstein is funding, it's all about manipulating the mind. And he said that he's also interested in early education, if you recall. Montessori and hypnotherapy, right up Jeffrey Epstein's alley. Second, we're going to look at Isabel Maxwell. Isabel Maxwell works for the World Economic Forum. Remember I said that this is all about the fourth industrial revolution, AI, and manipulating the human genome, which is what Jeffrey Epstein is funding? The fourth industrial revolution comes straight out of the World Economic Forum, and that's where Robert Maxwell's other daughter works. I can't believe it. Just to give you a flavor of how deep and dark and twisted the fourth industrial revolution is, watch this minute or 2 minutes of this documentary.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Isabel Maxwell has a twin sister, Christine Maxwell. Here she is here. She's an internet pioneer. And in fact, if you learn, she was partners with her sister Isabel in creating, supposedly, Magellan, which was one of the first professionally curated online search engines. After Magellan was acquired by Excite, do you remember that? If you're old enough, you can remember Excite, a competing search engine. She went on to co-found Chiliad, a software company involved in the advance of on-demand, massively scalable, intelligent mining of structured and unstructured data through the use of natural language search technologies. The firm's software was behind the data search technology used by the FBI's counterterrorism data warehouse. The FBI. And we've got the World Economic Forum, Montessori schools, hypnotherapy, search engines, internet pioneer, and the FBI. But Christine Maxwell's intrigue doesn't end there. She's married to a guy called Roger Molina. Never heard of him? Of course you haven't, because you're not a technocrat.
Okay, I just want to jump in here real quick for a second and point out when she says technocrat, she's not just like coining a phrase to mean that, oh, these people are using science to be in control. That's an actual political party. And of course, it's no coincidence that Elon Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, was the head of Canada's Technocracy Inc. party in the 1930s. Here's a picture of Elon Musk's grandfather right here, Dr. Joshua Haldeman, the social credit candidate. Where else have we heard that term, social credit? Oh yeah, social credit scores in communist China. The origins of these terms, whether it be social credit or technocracy, they go back down these family lines a long way. So you can see Elon Musk's grandfather that was the head of the technocracy movement then in the 1930s, and still now in our generation, Elon Musk is carrying on the family tradition, and his job is launching this Neuralink, a venture to merge the human brain with AI. Okay, so back to Maxwell's family line. I just wanted to point that out. When she says Roger Molina, he was a technocrat, that's a real thing, a political party even. Okay, so that's where we left off, with Ghislaine Maxwell and her sister married into the Molina family.
Roger Molina is an American physicist, astronomer, executive editor of Leonardo Publications at MIT, and distinguished professor of arts and technology of the University of Texas at Dallas. That's all very interesting, but the really fascinating thing about Roger Molina is who his dad is. His dad is Frank Molina. Frank Joseph Molina was an American aeronautical engineer and painter. Odd. Especially known for becoming both a pioneer in the art world and the realm of scientific engineering. That's very strange, Wikipedia editors. Why didn't you mention this? That Frank Molina is considered by some to be the father of modern rocketry. He created, along with 4 other people, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA.
Yep, coincidence of all coincidences. Epstein's Maxwell. Her sister just happens to be the daughter-in-law of the co-founder with Jack Parsons, known admitted Satanist Jack Parsons of NASA's JPL. So here's that famous picture. So here is Maxwell's father-in-law. Then here is Jack Parsons. And of course, this is L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of another one of our world's largest cults, Scientology, whose doctrine is exactly the same: infiltrate everything. What are the odds? Honestly, what are the odds? In fact, I'm pretty sure that I just covered Jack Parsons, didn't I, in the very last video that I put up, Paradise Lost. I'm pretty sure that I went into Jack Parsons there, and all of the sex magic and all of the orgies at his home. It was common knowledge. But if you watched the Paradise Lost about the missing children and everything, the video that I just put up last, then you know that I talked about Jack Parsons being directly mentored by Aleister Crowley, who everybody knows was an absolute open Satanist. So I think that's probably enough to absorb for one video for one day. But what do you guys think? What do you honestly think? Do you really think this is all a coincidence? All of this that you can trace back through family lines throughout all of world history? Is it really all just a coincidence? Or is it a conspiracy, just like Jeffrey Epstein was just charged with?